My son screamed down the phone. "Mom died. The funeral is tomorrow. She left everything to me. You won't get anything." I just smiled broadly. My wife was calmly drinking coffee right next to me. When they appeared at my door, faces filled with pure panic, they realized their scheme was collapsing right in front of them, and I already knew everything. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Ollie Gardner. I'm 65 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas, with my wife Barbara. For 38 years, I worked as an auditor for a major financial firm. Numbers don't lie, and neither do people's patterns when you know what to look for. I spent my career uncovering fraud, tracking money trails, and catching people who thought they were clever enough to beat the system. I retired 3 years ago thinking I'd left that world behind. Turns out the most elaborate scheme I'd ever encounter was brewing right under my own roof. My son Derek is 38. When he was a kid, he'd wait by the window every evening for me to come home. He'd run to the door, throw his arms around my legs, and tell me about his day in that rapid-fire way children do. Somewhere along the way, that bright-eyed boy disappeared. I can pinpoint when things changed, about 2 years ago, when he married Kristen. Kristen is beautiful, I'll give her that. Sharp features, perfect smile, the kind of polished appearance that comes from careful maintenance. But beauty and warmth aren't the same thing. From the first family dinner, I noticed how she'd steer conversations toward money, what we paid for the house, what my pension looked like, whether we had investments. Barbara thought I was being paranoid. "She's just curious about family," she'd say. But I'd spent 4 decades watching people's eyes when they talked about money. Kristen's eyes were different, calculating, measuring, appraising. Derek changed after the wedding. The calls became less frequent. The visits felt obligatory. When they did come over, there was a coldness in the air, like we were business associates rather than family. Derek would sit on our couch scrolling through his phone, while Kristen asked pointed questions about our estate planning. "Have you updated your will recently?" she'd ask with that practiced smile. "It's so important at your age." At your age. As if 65 meant 1 foot in the grave. The tension built slowly over those 2 years. Small comments that stung. Derek rolling his eyes when I'd tell a story. Kristen checking her watch during Sunday dinners. The way they'd exchange glances when Barbara mentioned the house value had appreciated. I started keeping mental notes, an old habit from my auditing days. Patterns emerged. They were always interested when finances came up, always distant when they didn't. That Thursday evening, it was the 12th, just an ordinary June evening, Barbara and I were in the kitchen. She was making her famous pot roast, and I was fixing a broken clock from my collection. I restore antique timepieces as a hobby. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. I had a 1924 pocket watch spread across the table when my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. "Hello? Dad?" His voice was strange, high-pitched, frantic. "Dad, it's Mom. She's gone." I felt my chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" "Mom died. Heart attack. She just collapsed, Dad. The ambulance came, but it was too late. She's dead." The words didn't make sense. I looked across the kitchen. Barbara was standing at the stove, stirring the pot roast, humming softly to herself. Very much alive. Very much not having a heart attack. "Derek, what?" "The funeral's tomorrow." He cut me off, his voice cracking. 2 o'clock at Peaceful Rest Funeral Home. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where have you been?" My mind raced. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of confusion. Maybe he'd gotten bad news about someone else and panicked. But the details were too specific. Tomorrow at 2. Peaceful rest. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. "Mom's will?" Derek's voice shifted, became harder. "She left everything to me, Dad. The house, the savings, everything. Her lawyer called me this afternoon. She updated it last month. You get nothing." I stared at Barbara. She noticed my expression and turned, concern crossing her face. I held up one finger, signaling her to wait. "Derek," I said slowly, "your mother is standing 10 feet away from me." Silence on the other end. Complete silence. Barbara's eyes widened. She mouthed, "What's wrong?" I put the phone on speaker. "Derek?" I repeated. Your mother is alive. She's in the kitchen. Right now. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, you need to stop. More silence. Then impossibly, I heard Kristen's voice in the background, sharp and urgent. Hang up! Hang up now! The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Barbara rushed over, gripping my arm. Ollie, what on earth? Derek just told me you died, I said flatly. Heart attack. Funeral tomorrow. Said you left everything to him in your will. Her face went pale. That's insane. Why would he? I don't know. But even as I said it, my auditor's brain was already working. The pieces were scattered, but they were there. Kristen's constant questions about our estate. Derek's sudden distance. The specific details. Funeral home. Time. The will. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. Barbara sank into a chair, her hand over her mouth. Our son just... He tried to... What does this mean? I looked at my wife of 40 years, her eyes filling with tears, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Derek had just attempted something. I didn't know exactly what yet, but my instincts, honed over decades of catching fraudsters, were screaming. It means, I said quietly, we need to figure out what they're planning, and we need to do it fast. I couldn't sleep that night. Barbara eventually drifted off around midnight, exhausted from crying, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities. Derek and Kristen thought Barbara was dead, or they were pretending she was dead. But why? What was the endgame? If they spread the word that she'd passed away, they'd have to produce a death certificate. They'd have to have a funeral. People would expect to see a body. Unless... I sat up in bed. Unless they weren't planning to let anyone see a body. Closed casket. Some excuse about the condition. And if they could forge a death certificate, my chest tightened at the thought, they might be able to manipulate the will. Get the house transferred. Clean out bank accounts before anyone realized Barbara was alive. It was audacious. Completely insane. But also, in a twisted way, it could work if they moved fast enough. A weekend to hold the funeral, file paperwork, maybe even start transferring assets. By the time anyone questioned it, they'd be long gone with our life savings. I remembered something then. A memory from 5 years ago, before Kristen entered the picture. Derek and I were fishing at Lady Bird Lake. He was 33, going through a rough patch after a breakup. We sat on the dock, lines in the water, and he'd ask me about my work. Dad, did you ever catch anyone who you thought was actually smart? Like they almost got away with it? I told him about a case, an accountant who'd embezzled $2.3 million over 7 years. The scheme was brilliant. Small amounts, buried in legitimate expenses, rotated through shell companies. He'd made one mistake. He got greedy at the end and took too much at once. The patient ones are the scariest, I'd told Derek. The ones who can wait, who plan every detail, those are the ones who almost succeed. Derek had nodded thoughtfully. How did you catch him? Patterns, I'd said. Everything leaves a pattern if you know how to look. That conversation haunted me now. Had I trained my own son to commit fraud? Another memory surfaced, more recent. Last Thanksgiving, just 8 months ago. The 4 of us around our dining table. Barbara had made her traditional turkey, and I had opened a nice bottle of wine. For a few hours it felt like old times. Derek was laughing, telling stories about his work at the insurance company. Kristen seemed almost warm. Then Derek's phone rang. He glanced at it, and his whole demeanor changed. He stood up abruptly. We have to go. But we haven't even had dessert, Barbara protested. Work emergency, Kristen said smoothly, already gathering her purse. But I'd seen the phone screen over Derek's shoulder. No name, no caller ID, just a number. They left in such a hurry that Kristen forgot her scarf. Barbara tried to return it the next week, drove all the way to their apartment. Derek answered the door, but didn't invite her in. He took the scarf, thanked her, and closed the door. Barbara came home in tears. He's changed so much, she'd said. That's not the boy I raised. I'd held her, told her it was just a phase. Young marriages were stressful. They'd come around. But they never did. Lying in the darkness now, I analyzed everything with the cold logic I'd used in thousands of audits. The signs had been there all along, the increasing distance, the focus on money, the way Kristen's questions always circled back to our assets. And that phone call tonight, Derek's certainty that Barbara was dead, his immediate pivot to the will, the panic when he realized his mistake. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated, premeditated. They'd been planning this. The question was, how far would they go? By the time the sun rose, I'd made my decision. If Derek and Kristen wanted to play games with fraud and forgery, they'd picked the wrong mark. I'd spent 38 years tracking financial criminals. I knew every trick, every loophole, every way people tried to hide their tracks. The difference was I'd always been on the side of justice. I'd always followed the rules. But Derek had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd tried to steal from his own parents. He'd terrorized his mother with a fake death announcement. And worst of all, he'd calculated that we were worth more to him dead, or pretending to be dead, than alive. Barbara woke around 7. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Did that really happen?" she asked. "Or did I dream it?" "It happened," I confirmed, "and I think I know what they're planning." I explained my theory. With each word, Barbara's face grew paler. "We should call the police," she said. "And tell them what? That our son made a strange phone call? They haven't actually done anything illegal yet, but they will." I reached for my phone. "I know someone who can help us. Someone who understands how these schemes work." I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Kenneth Morgan. We'd worked together years ago on several estate fraud cases. He was a notary now, meticulous and discreet. If anyone could tell me what Derek might be planning from a legal standpoint, it was Kenneth. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Ollie, it's been ages. What can I do for you?" "Kenneth," I said, "I need your help with something, and I need you to keep it completely confidential." "Of course. What's going on?" I took a breath. This was it. The moment I stopped being a victim and became something else. Something colder. Something Derek should have remembered from all those stories I'd told him about catching criminals. "I think my son is trying to fake my wife's death to steal our inheritance," I said, "and I'm going to prove it." The game had begun. Kenneth Morgan's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Congress Avenue, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a law firm. I'd been there once before, about 6 years ago, consulting on a probate case. The waiting room still had the same worn leather chairs and the faint smell of old paper and ink. Kenneth appeared in the doorway within minutes. He was in his early 60s, gray hair neatly trimmed, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. The kind of man who triple-checked every document and never missed a detail. "Ollie," he shook my hand firmly, "come in." His office was exactly as I remembered. Shelves lined with legal books, a massive oak desk covered in organized stacks of paperwork, certificates and licenses framed on the walls. Kenneth gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Now," he said, settling into his own chair, "tell me what's happening." I laid it out for him. The phone call, Derek's claim that Barbara was dead, the mention of a will, a funeral, the inheritance. Kenneth's expression shifted from concern to shock to something I recognized from my own reflection that morning. Cold calculation. "If your son is planning what you think he is," Kenneth said slowly, "he'd need several things. A forged death certificate, for one. That's a felony in Texas. If he's claiming there's a new will, he'd either need to forge that too, or—" He paused, fingers steepled under his chin. "Or he's hoping to move quickly enough that the lack of one doesn't matter. With a death certificate and your grief as cover, he might try to claim assets directly. How long would that take? Days if he knows what he's doing. Maybe a week. Banks, property transfers, there are processes, but in theory—" Kenneth shook his head. "It's brazen, Ollie. Incredibly risky. But if he's desperate enough, if he thinks you won't fight back—" "He thinks I'm a soft touch," I said. The words tasted bitter. All those years, I was the nice dad. The one who bailed him out when he overspent, who co-signed his first apartment lease, who loaned him money for his wedding. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He probably thinks I'll cry and fall apart while he loots our estate." Kenneth pulled out a notepad. "Let me check a few things. If any documents have been filed with your wife's name, I'll find them. It might take a day or two." "I don't have 2 days. He said the funeral is tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Kenneth's eyebrows shot up. "That's impossibly fast for a legitimate funeral. Even more proof this is staged." He made a note. "I'll make some calls today, But Ollie, you need more than just my help. You need documentation, evidence. If this goes to court... I know, I stood. I'm handling it. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A text from Barbara. Are you okay? What did he say? I texted back. Everything we suspected. I'll explain when I get home. Trust me. My next stop was across town. I'd looked up the name during my sleepless night. Gerald Stevens, private investigator. His office was less impressive than Kenneth's, a converted garage behind a house in South Austin, with a hand-painted sign that said, Stevens Investigations. Gerald himself answered the door, mid-50s, stocky build, the kind of face that blended into crowds. Former police detective, according to his website. Exactly what I needed. Mr. Gardner? He shook my hand. Come in. You said on the phone this was urgent. His office was cluttered but organized. Filing cabinets, a desk with 3 monitors, cameras and recording equipment on shelves. The walls were covered with certificates and photos of Gerald with various official-looking people. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is a new one, he said. Fake funeral. Forged death certificate. Your son's either very stupid or very desperate. Can you help? Surveillance, documentation, evidence gathering, that's what I do. He quoted me a price. $2,500 up front, plus expenses. It would drain a chunk of our savings, but what choice did I have? I wrote the check. I'll start immediately, Gerald said. I'll need your son's address, workplace, vehicle description, any places he frequents. I'll tail him, document everything, and report back to you regularly. I gave him all the details I had. Derek and Kristen's apartment on North Lamar Boulevard, his job at an insurance company downtown, her position at a bank on West 6th Street, their cars, his black Honda Civic, her silver Toyota Camry. Gerald was typing notes into his computer. If they're planning a fake funeral for tomorrow, they'll be busy today. Calls to make, arrangements to finalize. I'll catch it all. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt since the phone call last night. Control. The pieces were moving into place. Kenneth checking the legal angle. Gerald gathering evidence. And me, orchestrating it all. By the time I got home, it was almost noon. Barbara met me at the door, her face tight with worry. What happened? Kenneth's checking for any filed documents. If Derek's submitted anything with your name, we'll know. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself coffee from the pot she'd made. And I hired a private investigator. He's following Derek and Kristen right now. Barbara sat down heavily. A private investigator? This is really happening, isn't it? Our son is trying to... Her voice broke. I sat beside her, took her hand. I know this is hard, but we need to see exactly what they're planning. We need proof. My phone rang. Gerald. Already? I answered. You're going to want to hear this. Gerald's voice was tight with excitement. I put a tap on their phones. Legal, don't worry, I have ways. Derek and Kristen have been making calls all morning. To relatives, friends, neighbors, telling everyone Barbara died yesterday. Heart attack, funeral tomorrow at 2 o'clock at Peaceful Rest Funeral Home. He paused. Ollie, they're inviting people. They're actually planning to hold a funeral with guests. I felt the room tilt. A fake funeral was one thing, but inviting real people? Our friends, our family? Making them mourn for a woman who was sitting in our kitchen drinking coffee? I couldn't find words. There's more, Gerald continued. I followed them to Peaceful Rest about an hour ago. They met with a funeral director, paid cash, $4,800, for a casket and service. The director seemed confused about the lack of a body, but Kristen fed him some story about cremation already being done. They just wanted a memorial service. He bought it. $4,800 for a fake funeral, for my wife's fake death. I looked at Barbara. She was staring at me, reading my expression. What is it? She whispered. I put the phone on speaker so she could hear Gerald's next words. They're going through with it, Mr. Gardner. Tomorrow, at 2. About 30 people on the call list so far. Your neighbors, some cousins, old friends. They're telling everyone you're too devastated to make calls yourself, so they're handling notifications. Barbara made a small, wounded sound. Keep following them, I said. Document everything. Photos, recordings, whatever you can get legally. Already on it. Gerald hung up. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Barbara's hand trembled in mine. "They're really doing it," she said. "They're going to have a funeral. For me. While I'm alive. Yes. And everyone will come. They'll mourn. They'll think I'm dead." Her eyes met mine. "Ollie, this is sick. This is beyond anything I could have imagined." I pulled her close. She was shaking. But beneath the shock and hurt, I felt something else building in my chest. Not just anger anymore. Something colder, more focused. Derek had made his move. Now it was my turn. Barbara wanted to confront them immediately. She paced our living room, her grief transforming into fury. "I'm calling him right now," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'm going to tell him I know what he's doing, and he needs to stop this insanity before—" "No." I caught her wrist gently. "If we confront them now, they'll just deny everything. Cancel the funeral. Destroy whatever evidence they've created. We'll never prove what they intended." "But people think I'm dead, Ollie. Our friends, our family. For one day." I guided her to the couch, sat beside her. "One uncomfortable day. Then we expose them. But we need to let them go through with it. We need ironclad proof of what they're doing." She pulled away from me, eyes blazing. "You want to attend my own funeral?" "No, neither of us will be there. But Gerald will be, documenting everything." The fight drained out of her. She slumped against the cushions. "I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe our son—" My phone buzzed. A text from Kenneth. "Found something. Call me." I dialed immediately. "What did you find?" "A death certificate was filed this morning. Barbara Gardner, deceased yesterday, cause of death listed as myocardial infarction. It's a forgery, Ollie. A good one, but a forgery. The signature isn't from any licensed physician I can find. The document number doesn't match county records." Kenneth's voice was grim. "This is a felony. Third-degree felony in Texas. Your son could go to prison for this?" "Prison. My son?" The words didn't fit together in my mind. "Send me a copy of everything you found," I said. "Already done. Check your email." Next, I called Patricia Walters, an attorney whose name I'd gotten from Kenneth years ago. She specialized in estate law and family disputes. When I explained the situation, she was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Gardner," she finally said, "what your son is doing is criminal fraud. If you have documentation, the fake death certificate, proof of the funeral arrangements, evidence of intent to steal assets, you could press charges. That's not what I want yet. I want advice. Strategic advice. Then here's what I recommend. Let them proceed. The further they go, the more evidence you accumulate, the stronger your case becomes. If they hold the funeral, invite guests. Go through with the charade. That demonstrates clear intent. If they attempt to file for any assets afterward, that's attempted theft. And if I stop them now, they'll claim it was a misunderstanding. Derek will say he was confused, distraught, made a mistake. Without completed actions, proving intent becomes much harder." It was exactly what I'd thought, but hearing it from an attorney made it real. "Let them think they're succeeding," Patricia continued. "Then when you have everything documented, we hit them with everything at once. Civil suit, criminal charges if you want to pursue them, restraining orders, disinheritance, everything." After we hung up, I sat in my office, the small room off the kitchen where I kept my clock collection and restoration tools, and thought about the boy Derek used to be, the kid who'd helped me in this very room, handing me tiny screws and springs, asking endless questions about how things worked. When had he broken? When had the mechanism inside him that understood right and wrong stopped functioning? My phone rang again. Gerald. "Update," he said without preamble. "Kristen just visited a print shop on South Congress. I couldn't get inside, but I watched through the window. She was reviewing what looked like funeral programs, professional printing job, photos of Barbara, dates of birth and death, the whole package. Funeral programs, with my wife's picture, listing her as deceased. There's something else," Gerald said. "I have a contact in the Austin PD, pulled some strings. That death certificate Kenneth found? It was filed electronically this morning using a stolen physician's license number. The doctor, Dr. Raymond Pace, is on vacation in Colorado, has no idea his credentials were used. How did they get his license information? Kristen works at a bank. She has access to customer files, credit reports, background checks. Not hard to find that kind of information if you know where to look and don't care about breaking laws. Each new detail was another nail, another piece of evidence. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just committing fraud. They were doing it methodically, professionally, with planning and forethought. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a calculated crime. Gerald called again in the late afternoon. They're back at peaceful rest, meeting with the funeral director again, going over final arrangements. I'm in the parking lot. Got photos of them entering and leaving. Time-stamped, dated. Good. Ollie. Gerald's voice softened slightly. I've worked a lot of cases. Infidelity, fraud, corporate espionage. But watching a son plan his mother's fake funeral while she's alive? This is a new low. Even for me. After dinner, Barbara barely touched her food. My phone rang. Derek. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello? Dad? Derek's voice was different now, calmer, more controlled. The panic from yesterday had been replaced by something practiced. I'm sorry about yesterday. I was in shock. I wasn't thinking clearly. I understand, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Mom's funeral is tomorrow, 2 o'clock at Peaceful Rest. I know this is hard for you, but I hope you'll come to say goodbye. Every word was a lie, every syllable calculated. I could hear Kristen coaching him in the background, her whispered prompts barely audible. I'll think about it, I said. Dad, she would have wanted you there. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. I said I'll think about it, Derek. A pause. Then, okay, I understand. Just, if you change your mind, we'll save you a seat. Front row. He hung up. Barbara was watching me from the kitchen doorway. What did he say? He invited me to your funeral. I set the phone down. Very thoughtfully offered to save me a front row seat. She laughed. It came out harsh and brittle. Our son, our baby boy. I stood, walked to the window. Outside, the Austin evening was settling in, the sky turning orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Derek and Kristen were finalizing their plans, polishing their lies, preparing for tomorrow's performance. They thought they'd won, thought they'd outsmarted the old man, the retired auditor who spent his days fixing clocks and living quietly with his wife. But they'd forgotten something crucial, something I'd learned in 38 years of tracking fraud. The best way to catch a criminal isn't to stop them before they act. It's to let them commit the crime, document every step, and then bring the hammer down when they're fully exposed. Tomorrow, Derek and Kristen would stand in Peaceful Rest funeral home. They'd accept condolences. They'd play the grieving son and daughter-in-law. They'd look at that empty casket and tell tearful lies about the woman they'd supposedly lost. And I'd be watching. Every moment documented. Every lie recorded. Then, when they least expected it, when they thought they'd gotten away with it, that's when I'd strike. I turned from the window. Barbara was still in the doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that Derek is about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating people, and about the consequences of greed. She nodded. What do we do? Tomorrow, nothing. We stay home. We let Gerald do his job. We let them perform their little show. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. And then when they think they've succeeded, we show them exactly what happens when you try to con a man who spent 4 decades catching cons. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the grieving father, the confused victim of my son's scheme. I was the hunter, and Derek had just walked into my trap. The morning of the funeral arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Ironic, really. The kind of day Barbara would have spent in her garden, tending to her roses. Instead, she stood in our bedroom, staring at her closet with an expression I'd never seen before. Not grief, not fear. Something harder. What should a woman wear to her own funeral? She asked. I looked up from my phone where I'd been reviewing Gerald's latest text. He was already at Peaceful Rest, setting up cameras in discreet locations. Something memorable, I said. She pulled out a dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. Bright coral, fitted, elegant, the kind of thing that demanded attention. Perfect, I said. Barbara turned to me. Are you sure about this? Once I walk in there, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. I stood, walked to her, took her hands. Derek and Kristen chose this path. They invited those people. They created this spectacle. All you're doing is telling the truth. She nodded, but I could see the tremor in her hands. This was our son. No matter what he'd done, that fact remained. My phone buzzed. Gerald. They're arriving. Derek and Kristen just pulled up. Black suits, sunglasses, real professional mourners. I showed Barbara the text. She took a shaky breath. I won't be there with you, I said, but Gerald will be recording everything, and I'll be watching the live feed from his camera. Why aren't you coming? Because if I show up, Derek might panic and call it off. But if you appear alone after he's committed to the performance, I smiled grimly, the evidence will be undeniable. Another text from Gerald. Guests arriving. I count 28 so far. Your neighbors, the Hendersons, just walked in. Mrs. Chen from Barbara's book club. Your cousin Marcus. They all look devastated. Real people. Real grief. For a woman who wasn't dead. My hands clenched into fists. Barbara checked her makeup one final time. How do I look? Like you're about to ruin someone's day? She almost smiled. I drove her to within 2 blocks of peaceful rest. Then she got out. Gerald had positioned himself inside, claiming to be a distant family friend. He'd text me when Derek began his eulogy. That would be Barbara's cue. I parked where I could see the funeral home's entrance. People were still arriving. I recognized most of them. Bill and Sandra from down the street, who'd shared countless barbecues with us. Tom Fletcher, who played poker with me every other Thursday. Janet Morrison, Barbara's closest friend since college. All of them believing they were here to mourn. My phone connected to Gerald's camera feed. The image was slightly grainy, but clear enough. The funeral home's main room had been set up with rows of chairs facing a closed casket. Flowers everywhere, expensive arrangements. Derek hadn't skimped on the production value. I watched Derek and Kristen work the room. They stood near the casket, accepting condolences. Derek's face was a masterpiece of false grief. Eyes red-rimmed, jaw tight, accepting hugs with a stiff, broken posture. Kristen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, one hand resting on Derek's arm in a gesture of support. They were good. I'd give them that. If I hadn't known better, I'd have believed every second of it. At exactly 2 o'clock, Derek moved to the front of the room. The guests settled into their seats. The room fell silent. My phone buzzed. Starting now. Get Barbara ready. I texted back to Barbara, who was waiting in the parking lot. Go. Through Gerald's camera, I watched Derek clear his throat. Thank you all for coming today. I know my mother. His voice cracked perfectly. I know Mom would have been so moved to see how many lives she touched. Several people in the audience pulled out tissues. My father couldn't be here today, Derek continued. This has been too difficult for him, but Mom would have understood. She always understood. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly, I wondered how long he'd practiced. Mom was the kind of person who always put family first, Derek said. She taught me the value of love, of loyalty, of... The funeral home's side door opened. Barbara stepped into the room. For a moment, nobody noticed. Derek was still talking, lost in his performance. But then Janet Morrison, sitting in the 3rd row, turned her head. Her eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my, she gasped. The woman next to her followed her gaze. Then another. Then another. Like dominoes falling, heads turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Derek stopped mid-sentence. What? He turned. Barbara stood in the doorway, wearing that coral dress, very much alive, very much not in the casket behind her son. The color drained from Derek's face. I mean, literally drained. I watched through the camera as he went from flushed to pale gray in seconds. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating with shock. Kristen grabbed his arm, her perfectly composed mask shattering. She stumbled backward, knocking into a flower arrangement. It toppled with a crash that echoed through the silent room. Barbara? Someone whispered. But you're dead? Barbara walked forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. The silence was absolute, broken only by someone's phone hitting the floor. Hello, everyone, Barbara said. Her voice was steady, cold. I apologize for the confusion. As you can see, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. She stopped directly in front of Derek. He was shaking now, visible tremors running through his body. His hands opened and closed spasmodically at his sides. "Derek," Barbara said softly, "would you like to explain to our friends why they're here?" "Mom, I—" His voice cracked, but not with grief this time, with pure panic. "I can explain." "Can you?" Barbara's eyes were ice. "Please, explain to Janet, to Bill and Sandra, to everyone who came here today believing I was dead, why you organized a funeral for a living woman." The room erupted, multiple conversations at once. Someone near the back said, "What the hell is happening?" Mrs. Chen started crying, real tears now, but of confusion and shock rather than grief. Derek's mouth worked soundlessly. Kristen tugged at his sleeve. "We have to go," she hissed. "Derek, we have to go now." "I know what you did," Barbara continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I know about the forged death certificate. I know you were planning to steal our estate, and everyone here now knows too." "This is a misunderstanding," Kristen shrieked. The polished veneer was completely gone now. Her face was blotchy, mascara running. "You don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly," Barbara said. She pulled out her phone, held it up. "And so will the police. I've already called them. They should be here in about 5 minutes." That did it. Derek grabbed Kristen's hand and ran. Literally ran, pushing through the crowd of stunned guests, knocking over chairs in his haste to reach the exit. Kristen's heel caught on something and she stumbled, but Derek dragged her along. Through the camera, I watched them burst through the front door and sprint to their car. I started my engine. I was already home when they arrived, exactly as I'd planned. I'd left the funeral home the moment Derek and Kristen fled, knowing they'd come straight here. Desperate people are predictable. Barbara was still at peaceful rest, explaining the situation to our shocked friends with Gerald's help. I'd wanted her away from this next part. What I was about to do didn't require an audience. Their car screeched into my driveway 14 minutes later. I watched through the living room window as they practically fell out of the vehicle, stumbling toward my front door with the kind of panicked urgency that comes from watching your entire scheme collapse in real time. The pounding started before they even reached the door properly. Fists against wood, desperate and arrhythmic. "Dad! Dad! Open up!" Derek's voice was raw, stripped of any pretense. "Please, we need to talk to you." I waited. Let them knock. Let them panic. "Mr. Gardner," Kristen now, her voice shrill. "Ollie, please. This is all a huge misunderstanding." I counted to 30 in my head. Then I opened the door. The sight of them was almost worth the $4,800 they'd spent on a fake funeral. Almost. Derek looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His carefully styled hair was disheveled, his tie askew, his shirt collar dark with sweat. His eyes were wild, darting, the eyes of an animal in a trap. Kristen was worse. Her makeup had run in black streaks down her cheeks. That polished, calculated mask she always wore had completely shattered. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to stop the trembling. "Dad, thank God!" Derek tried to push past me into the house. I didn't move. Just stood there, blocking the doorway, watching them. "We can explain," Derek said. His words tumbled out in a rush. "It's not what it looks like. There was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and—" "A mistake," I repeated flatly. "Yes, we thought—" He looked at Kristen desperately. "We received information that Barbara had passed away." Kristen jumped in, her voice too high, too fast. "From a hospital. They called us. They said there'd been an emergency, and by the time we—" "Stop." One word, cold as winter ice. They both froze. "I'm going to give you one chance to tell the truth," I said. One. Because every lie you tell right now is another piece of evidence I'll use against you. Derek's face crumpled. "Dad, please. I'm your son. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can—" "You forged a death certificate with a stolen physician's license," I said, each word precise, clinical. "You organized a fake funeral. You invited real people to mourn a woman who was alive. You planned to steal our assets using fraudulent documents. That's not a mistake, Derek. That's a crime. Multiple crimes, actually." The color that had briefly returned to his face drained away again. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish drowning in air. "We didn't—" Kristen started. "Shut up." I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the calculation even now behind the panic. She was already thinking, already planning her next move. I know exactly what you did. I've known since the moment Derek called me claiming Barbara was dead. That's not... Derek tried again. I held up one hand, walked back into my house, returned with a manila folder I'd prepared that morning. Opened it. Forged death certificate, I said, showing them the first document. Filed using Dr. Raymond Pace's stolen credentials. He's currently in Colorado, by the way. The police have already contacted him. Derek's knees actually buckled slightly. He caught himself against the doorframe. Receipt from Peaceful Rest Funeral Home, I continued, showing the next page. $4,800, cash payment, for a casket to hold a body that doesn't exist. How did you... Kristen's voice was barely a whisper. I hired a private investigator. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Gerald Stevens. He's been following you for 2 days. He has video of every call you made, every arrangement you finalized. He was at the funeral today, recording everything. Your performance was impressive, by the way. Very convincing. Derek slid down the doorframe until he was almost sitting. Dad, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We'll give everything back. We'll... Give what back, Derek? You haven't stolen anything yet. You failed. The only thing you've successfully done is commit fraud, forgery, and attempt to steal from your own parents. We just wanted... Kristen started, but her voice broke. She was crying now, real tears mixing with the mascara tracks. We just wanted to secure our future. For our children. I looked at her. Let the silence stretch. You don't have children, I said quietly. Her face went slack. The lie had been automatic, reflexive, and it had just destroyed whatever small credibility she might have had left. You're pathetic, I continued. Both of you. You thought you could manipulate me. Thought I'd be too grief-stricken to notice. Too old and soft to fight back. I leaned forward slightly. You forgot one crucial detail. I spent 38 years catching people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. People who thought they could commit fraud and get away with it. What are you going to do? Derek's voice was small, childlike. I pulled out another document from the folder. This is a criminal complaint. I'll be filing it with the Austin Police Department tomorrow morning. The charges are forgery of official documents. That's a third-degree felony in Texas, and attempted fraud, second-degree felony. Combined, you're looking at up to 20 years in prison. Kristen made a sound like a wounded animal. Derek just stared at the paper, his face the color of old milk. Tomorrow, I repeated. I'll also be filing civil suits for damages, emotional distress, defamation, and the costs I've incurred investigating your scheme. Patricia Walters is handling that. You've met Patricia, haven't you, Kristen? Your bank's legal department worked with her last year? Kristen's head snapped up. You can't. I can. I will. And here's what else I'm doing. I pulled out the final document. This is a change to our will. Barbara and I executed it this morning before the funeral. Derek, you are completely disinherited. Not 1 cent. Not the house, not the savings, nothing. When we die, actually die, years from now hopefully, everything goes to charity. Derek's face crumpled completely. Tears started running down his cheeks. Dad, no. Please, I'm your son. I'm your only child. You stopped being my son the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled. Please, he whispered. I'll do anything. We'll do anything. Just don't destroy our lives. I looked at both of them. Derek, tears streaming down his face, broken and begging. Kristen, mascara streaked and shaking, her carefully constructed facade in ruins around her. Part of me, a small, distant part that remembered a little boy who'd once waited by the window for me, felt something almost like pity. The rest of me felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You destroyed your own lives, I said. The moment you decided to forge that death certificate. The moment you called our friends and family to mourn a living woman. The moment you stood in that funeral home and performed grief you didn't feel. I stepped back, began to close the door. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'm filing the complaint. After that, it's out of my hands. The state of Texas will decide what happens to you. Dad, wait! I closed the door, stood there listening to them outside. Derek's sobs, Kristen's frantic whispers urging him to get up, to leave. To think, their footsteps finally retreating, their car starting, driving away. I walked to my office, sat down at my desk, picked up the 1924 pocket watch I'd been working on when this all started. My hands were steady, no tremor, no doubt. My phone buzzed. Barbara. On my way home. Everyone knows now. Janet's calling people. It'll be all over town by morning. I texted back. Good. The pieces were all in place. The evidence was documented. The witnesses had seen everything. Derek and Kristen's scheme had collapsed completely, spectacularly, in the most public way possible. And tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. That evening, Barbara came home exhausted. She'd spent hours at peaceful rest after Derek and Kristen fled, explaining to our shocked friends and family what had actually happened. The funeral director had been horrified, mortified that his establishment had been used for fraud. He'd immediately refunded the $4,800 and offered his full cooperation with any investigation. Everyone's talking about it, Barbara said, sinking onto our couch. Janet called 12 people before she even left the parking lot. The Hendersons were furious. They'd canceled a trip to be there. Marcus kept saying he couldn't believe it, that Derek seemed so convincing. He was convincing, I said. That's what made it dangerous. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Mr. Gardner? A woman's voice, professional, clipped. This is Christine Morrison from Channel 7 News. We've heard about what happened at Peaceful Rest today, and we'd love to get your statement for our evening broadcast. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. Same request. I turned it off. They're going to make this public, Barbara said quietly. Really public. Good. Let Derek and Kristen explain to the whole city why they thought faking a death was a brilliant idea. But even as I said it, I felt something twist in my chest. This was my son. No matter what he'd done, some part of me still remembered the kid who'd fallen asleep on my shoulder during long car rides, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd hugged me so tight at his high school graduation I could barely breathe. That night, neither of us slept well. I kept replaying Derek's face at my door, the panic, the desperation, the way he'd said, "Dad, please," in that broken voice. Around 3 a.m, I got up and sat in my office. The pocket watch was still on my desk, partially disassembled. I picked up one of the tiny gears, held it up to the light. Everything has consequences. Every action, every choice, like watch gears. One broken piece and the whole mechanism fails. Derek had broken something, and there was no fixing it. The next morning, Sunday, roughly 28 hours after Derek's initial phone call, I drove to the Austin Police Department downtown. Barbara wanted to come, but I asked her to stay home. This part was mine to do. The building was busy despite it being Sunday. I approached the front desk, told the officer I needed to file a criminal complaint. She directed me to wait. 15 minutes later, a detective appeared. Robert Hayes, his badge read. Mid-40s, receding hairline, eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Mr. Gardner, I'm told you have a complaint to file. I followed him to a small interview room, sat down, pulled out the folder I'd prepared. 3 days ago, I began, my son called to tell me my wife had died. She was sitting next to me at the time, very much alive. Hayes's expression didn't change, but I saw his pen pause over his notepad. I laid out everything: the forged death certificate, the stolen physician credentials, the fake funeral with real guests, the $4,800 spent at Peaceful Rest, the clear intent to defraud us of our assets. Hayes listened, taking notes. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Do you have documentation? I slid the folder across the table. Death certificate with Dr. Raymond Pace's stolen license number. He's in Colorado. You can verify he never signed this. Receipt from the funeral home. Video evidence of the funeral and my wife's appearance. Witness statements from 30 guests. Audio recordings of my son inviting people to mourn a living woman. Financial records showing their debt situation that would motivate this scheme. Hayes opened the folder, flipped through page after page. His expression grew darker with each one. He looked up at me. This is remarkably thorough, Mr. Gardner. How did you gather all this in 3 days? I'm a retired auditor, and I hired a private investigator the morning after my son's call. You knew immediately what they were planning? I suspected. Then I confirmed. Then I documented. I leaned forward slightly. Detective Hayes, my son committed multiple felonies. I want him prosecuted. Fully. Something in my voice must have conveyed my seriousness because Hayes set down his pen and looked at me directly. You understand what you're asking. If we pursue this, if the DA takes the case, your son could go to prison. I understand perfectly. This is your son, who tried to steal my wife's identity and our life savings by claiming she was dead, who terrorized our friends and family with lies, who forged official documents, who committed fraud. My voice was steady, cold. Yes, he's my son, but that doesn't give him immunity from consequences. Hayes nodded slowly. I'll need to interview your wife, the funeral director, any witnesses, the private investigator. Gerald Stevens. His contact information is in the folder. And you're prepared for this to become public? The media will. They already have. I've had 5 calls from news stations since yesterday. Derek chose to make this public when he invited 30 people to a fake funeral. I'm just finishing what he started. Hayes closed the folder. I'll get a detective assigned to this immediately. Given the evidence you've provided, we'll likely make arrests within the next few days. Once that happens, there's no taking it back. I don't want to take it back. He studied my face for a moment. Most parents, even when their kids do terrible things, they hesitate. They want to protect them. My son calculated that stealing from me was worth more than my trust, my love, or his mother's feelings. He made his choice. I'm making mine. Hayes stood, extended his hand. I'll be in touch within 24 hours. I shook it, walked out of the police station into bright Austin sunshine, got in my car, sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. There was no triumph in this, no victory, just a cold, heavy certainty that this was necessary. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. Please, we need to talk. Just 5 minutes. We can fix this. Derek, I deleted it. Another text, seconds later. Dad, I'm begging you. Don't do this. Think about Mom, what this will do to her. The audacity. Using Barbara, the woman he'd tried to pretend was dead, as leverage. I typed back, you had 3 days to think about Mom. You chose to fake her death instead. We're done talking. I blocked the number. That evening, Barbara and I were eating the quiet dinner when my phone rang. Kenneth Morgan. Ollie, I just got a call from Kristen's father, he said without preamble. Harold Walsh. He's a client of mine, estate planning. He's asking me to mediate between you and Derek. No. He says Derek and Kristen are willing to make full restitution. Pay for all your costs. Apologize publicly, whatever you want. They just want you to drop the police complaint. Kenneth, I filed the complaint this morning. It's out of my hands now. Actually, it's not. The DA hasn't decided whether to prosecute yet. If you withdraw the complaint, tell them you don't want to press charges. I'm not withdrawing anything. A pause. Ollie, I have to ask. Are you sure about this? Once the DA prosecutes, once there's a trial, this becomes permanent. Derek will have a felony record. He'll lose his job, probably never work in insurance again. Kristen, too. Banks don't employ convicted felons. They should have thought about that before committing felonies. I'm just saying, there might be a path where... Kenneth, I cut him off. Derek stood in front of 30 people and pretended to mourn his living mother. He forged government documents. He committed fraud. If you're calling to advocate for him, we're done talking. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not advocating. I'm just... Harold Walsh is devastated. He says Kristen's always made bad decisions. But this? Kenneth sighed. I told him I'd call. I've done that. What you do now is your business. Thank you. After I hung up, Barbara looked at me across the table. Harold Walsh called? Through Kenneth. Wants us to drop the charges. What did you say? No. She nodded, set down her fork. Ollie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I waited. Do you still love Derek, after everything? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I love the boy he was, I finally said. I love the memories. The kid who used to help me with my clocks, who made terrible jokes, who believed in fairness and honesty because that's what we taught him. I met her eyes. But the man who called me 3 days ago? Who planned all this? I don't know him, and I don't owe him anything. Barbara's eyes filled with tears. Me neither, she whispered. The arrest happened 3 days later, on a Wednesday morning, Detective Hayes called me at 7 a.m. to let me know they were executing the warrants. We're picking them up at their apartment in about an hour, he said. I wanted you to know before it hits the news. Thank you. The DA reviewed all your evidence last night. She's prosecuting. 2 felony counts each: forgery of government documents, third-degree felony, and attempted theft by deception, second-degree felony. The legal terminology was clean, clinical. It didn't capture the reality of what those words meant for Derek and Kristen. Prison time, criminal records, destroyed careers, but then heart attack and funeral hadn't captured the reality of what they'd tried to do to Barbara and me either. What happens now? I asked. Arraignment, probably tomorrow or Friday. Bail hearing. Then we wait for trial or a plea deal. After we hung up, I told Barbara. She sat at the kitchen table, coffee going cold in her cup, and said nothing for a long time. I should feel something, she finally said. Satisfaction, relief, something. But I just feel empty. I know. My phone started ringing around 9 a.m. First, Patricia Walters, confirming she'd heard about the arrests and was prepared to file the civil suit for disinheritance. Then Kenneth, calling to say Harold Walsh had contacted him again, this time asking about bail money. Then Gerald, reporting that the local news had the story and it was spreading fast. I turned on the TV Channel 7, the same station that had called me days ago. Arrested this morning in what police are calling an elaborate fraud scheme. Derek Gardner, 38, and his wife Kristen, 36, allegedly forged a death certificate and organized a fake funeral for Gardner's mother, who is alive and well. According to court documents, the couple planned to use the false death to steal from the woman's estate. They showed Derek and Kristen being led from their apartment in handcuffs. Derek's head was down, refusing to look at the cameras. Kristen was crying, mascara already running. The reporter continued. Bail has been set at $50,000 each. The couple remains in custody at Travis County Jail. If convicted, they face up to 20 years in prison. Barbara turned off the TV. I can't watch this. Neither could I, really. Despite everything, seeing my son in handcuffs made something in my chest twist painfully. Around noon, my phone rang. Harold Walsh directly this time, not through Kenneth. Ollie, please, he said without preamble. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. My daughter made a terrible mistake. Derek led her astray. But $50,000 bail? They can't afford that. They'll sit in jail for months waiting for trial. That's how the system works. You could ask the DA to reduce the charges. You could tell them you don't want prosecution. I'm not doing that. For the love of... He stopped himself. Ollie, we've known each other for years. Our kids got married. We're family. Harold, your daughter helped forge a death certificate with my wife's name on it. She helped organize a funeral where real people mourned a living woman. She's not a victim here. She's a criminal. She's my daughter, and Derek is my son, but that doesn't excuse what they did. The line went dead. He'd hung up. That afternoon, Patricia called again. I've got news. Derek and Kristen hired an attorney. Bradley Morrison does a lot of criminal defense work. Cheap, mostly plea deals. He called me wanting to negotiate. Negotiate what? He wants you to drop the civil suit in exchange for Derek and Kristen pleading guilty to reduce charges. Maybe misdemeanors instead of felonies. Probation instead of jail time. No. I told him that would be your answer. But Ollie, you should know. He's going to try a different angle. He's planning to argue that you orchestrated this whole thing, that you knew about their plan, and instead of stopping them, you encouraged it to go forward so you could gather evidence. Entrapment, basically. I laughed. Actually laughed. They called me claiming Barbara was dead. They organized a funeral. They forged documents. How is that my fault? It's not. But desperate attorneys make desperate arguments. Just be prepared. This might get uglier before it's over. She was right. 2 days later, Friday, 5 days after the arrests, Derek and Kristen made bail. Not the $50,000 each, but a reduced amount after their attorney argued they weren't flight risks. $10,000 each, which Harold Walsh apparently scraped together. I found out because Derek called me. From Harold's phone, since I'd blocked his number. Dad, we need to talk. I should have hung up, but something made me stay on the line. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to hear what he'd say now that he'd spent several days in jail. Talk, I said. Our attorney says you're refusing to negotiate, that you want us to go to prison. I want you to face consequences for your actions. If that means prison, yes. Dad, I'm your son. You keep saying that like it means something, like it should make me ignore what you did. We made a mistake. You made dozens of deliberate choices over multiple days. That's not a mistake, Derek. That's a crime spree. I heard Kristen in the background, her voice shrill. Tell him we'll give him whatever he wants. Money, apology, whatever. You don't have anything I want, I said. And even if you did, it wouldn't change what you did. Morrison says he can make this about you, Derek said, his voice changing, becoming harder. He says we can argue you manipulated us, that you knew what we were planning and you let it happen just so you could destroy us. Go ahead. Try that in court. See how well it works when the jury watches video of you giving a eulogy at your living mother's fake funeral. You're ruining our lives? No, Derek, you did that yourself. I'm just making sure you can't do it to anyone else. If you do this, if you go through with prosecution, you'll never see me again. Ever. Is that what you want? The question was meant to hurt, meant to make me reconsider. But all I felt was that same cold certainty I'd felt at the police station. If the price of seeing you again is letting you get away with fraud and forgery, then yes, that's exactly what I want. Silence on the other end. Then, you're not the man I thought you were. Funny, I said. I was thinking the same thing about you. I hung up. Barbara had been listening from the doorway. He threatened to cut you off. He was going to do that anyway, once we died and he got the inheritance. Except now, there is no inheritance. Not for him. She came and sat next to me. Do you think we're doing the right thing? I think we're doing the only thing. Derek and Kristen committed serious crimes. If we let them walk away from this, what does that teach them? That fraud is acceptable as long as you're family. I keep thinking about when he was little, Barbara said softly. When he was good? When he was ours? I know. I took her hand. But that boy grew up, and the man he became made choices. Bad choices. Cruel choices. We can mourn the boy he was, but we can't excuse the man he is. The weekend passed quietly. On Monday, Patricia called with an update. The DA offered a plea deal. 3 years probation, 500 hours community service, full restitution of your costs, which she's calculating at $12,300, covering Gerald's fees, my fees, and punitive damages, plus formal disinheritance, no contact order, and both of them banned from working in positions of financial trust. What about the felony charges? They'd plead to reduce charges. Third-degree felony forgery stands, but the theft charge drops to a misdemeanor. So Derek gets a felony record? Yes, which means no more insurance work. Kristen loses her banking license. Both will have trouble finding employment, but no jail time. I thought about it. Derek in orange behind bars. The image should have given me satisfaction. It didn't. It just made me tired. What's the alternative? Trial. Could take 6 months to a year. More stress, more public attention. If they're convicted at trial, they face the full 20 years, though they'd probably get 5 to 10. What do you recommend? Honestly, take the plea. They lose everything that matters. Careers, reputation, inheritance rights. They have criminal records. You get restitution, and it's over. I'll talk to Barbara. That evening we discussed it. Barbara was quiet for a long time after I explained the options. I don't want him in prison, she finally said. I don't want that image in my head, but I want him to understand what he did. Really understand. The plea deal does that. He loses his career, his reputation, any claim to our estate. He'll carry that felony conviction for the rest of his life. She nodded. Then that's what we do. We accept the plea. I called Patricia the next morning and told her. She said she'd informed the DA and Derek's attorney. This should wrap up in a couple weeks, she said. Preliminary hearing to formalize the plea, then sentencing. After that, you're done. Done. The word felt strange. This had consumed every moment of the past 2 weeks, and soon it would just end. But as I hung up and looked at Barbara across our kitchen table, I realized it would never really be over. Derek would always be our son. This would always be what he did. That wound would never fully heal. All we could do was make sure the infection didn't spread. July arrived with scorching Texas heat. The weeks since Derek's arrest had been a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and the constant weight of knowing what was coming. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-month. Patricia called me the morning of. "Kristen's not taking the plea," she said. "Her attorney filed paperwork yesterday. She wants to go to trial. Claims she was coerced by Derek, that you manipulated the situation." "And Derek?" "He's taking the plea. Smart move. But this means we have to go through a hearing for Kristen. She'll try to make you look like the villain. Be prepared." The courthouse was downtown, an imposing limestone building that smelled like old paper and floor polish. Barbara and I arrived early, sat on a bench outside the courtroom. I watched people pass, other cases, other dramas, other families falling apart in bureaucratic silence. Derek and Kristen arrived separately. Derek with his cheap attorney, Bradley Morrison, looking defeated already. His suit was wrinkled, tie crooked. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Kristen came in with a different lawyer, someone Harold Walsh had apparently hired, a woman in an expensive suit who carried herself like she'd won cases before. Kristen herself looked nothing like the polished woman who'd sat at our dinner table asking about our estate planning. Her hair was pulled back severely, no makeup, clothes deliberately plain, the costume of a victim. They sat on opposite sides of the hallway. Derek stared at the floor. Kristen whispered urgently with her attorney. When they called us in, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Judge Martinez presided, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, according to Patricia. Kristen's attorney went first. "Your Honor, my client was manipulated by both her husband and her father-in-law. Mr. Gardner knew about the alleged plan from the beginning, and instead of stopping it, he orchestrated events to maximize damage to my client." "Alleged plan?" Judge Martinez interrupted. "Counselor, there's video evidence of your client at a fake funeral. How is that alleged?" "My client believed the funeral was real, Your Honor. She thought Barbara Gardner had actually died." "Then why did she help forge the death certificate?" Kristen's attorney hesitated. "We dispute that she knew the document was forged. It had a stolen physician's license number on it. Your client works in banking. She deals with identity verification daily. Are you arguing she didn't recognize a forged document?" I watched Kristen's face as the judge dismantled her attorney's arguments. The mask of victimhood was cracking. Her jaw was tight, hands clenched in her lap. "Call your first witness," Judge Martinez said. They called me. I walked to the stand, was sworn in, sat down, looked directly at Kristen for the first time since she'd fled our door weeks ago. Her attorney approached. "Mr. Gardner, when did you first learn about the alleged funeral plan?" "When my son called claiming my wife was dead. She was sitting next to me at the time." "And what did you do?" "I investigated, hired a private investigator, gathered evidence." "You didn't try to stop them?" "There was nothing to stop yet. Making a phone call isn't illegal. I needed to document what they were actually planning." "So you deliberately let them proceed? Let them invite real people to this funeral? Let them spend money on a casket?" "I let them commit the crimes they'd already decided to commit. All I did was document it. You could have stopped them at any point." "Counselor," Judge Martinez interrupted again, "are you arguing that it's Mr. Gardner's responsibility to stop his adult son from committing fraud? That seems backwards." Kristen's attorney tried a different angle. "Mr. Gardner, you claim to have hired a private investigator immediately. That suggests you'd planned this all along." "I planned to catch criminals. They planned to commit crimes. Those aren't equivalent. You manipulated events. I documented events. There's a difference." The questioning went on for another 20 minutes. Each attempt to paint me as the orchestrator fell apart, because the truth was simple. Derek and Kristen had made every choice themselves. I'd just been watching. When they finally let me step down, I saw Derek staring at Kristen with something like despair. She'd promised she could win this. She was losing. They called Barbara next. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she gripped her purse. But when she started speaking, her voice was steady. "My son organized a funeral for me while I was alive," she said. "He invited my friends, my family, people who loved me, and he made them mourn for nothing." Her voice broke slightly. "That's not a mistake. That's not coercion. That's cruelty." Kristen's attorney tried to cross-examine, but Barbara just repeated the facts. The fake death certificate with her name. The funeral. The lies. There was no way to spin it. After Barbara, they called Detective Hayes. He laid out the evidence methodically, the forged documents, the financial motive, the timeline of planning. By the time he finished, even Kristen's attorney looked tired. Judge Martinez called a recess. We waited outside for 40 minutes. Derek sat alone on a bench, head in his hands. Kristen paced, her attorney trying to calm her down. When we reconvened, the judge didn't waste time. Ms. Gardner, I've reviewed all the evidence. The video footage, the documents, the witness testimony. I find no evidence that you were coerced or manipulated by anyone except possibly your co-defendant. However, the evidence clearly shows you were an active, willing participant in this scheme. Kristen's face went pale. I'm denying your motion to dismiss. This case will proceed. However, Judge Martinez looked at Kristen's attorney. I strongly suggest your client reconsider the plea offer, because if this goes to trial, I suspect a jury will be even less sympathetic than I am. Kristen made a sound like she'd been punched. We left the courthouse an hour later. Derek had signed his plea agreement. 3 years probation, 500 hours community service, $12,300 restitution, split between him and Kristen. Permanent disinheritance. No contact order. Kristen's attorney had pulled her aside, was having what looked like an urgent conversation. Through the courthouse windows, I could see Kristen crying. She'll take the plea, Patricia said, watching them. She has no choice now. The judge made it clear she's losing. Good. Final sentencing is in about a week. Both of them will appear, formally accept the terms, and then it's over. Over. After a month of this consuming every moment, it would finally be over. Barbara took my hand. Let's go home. We drove through Austin traffic in silence. When we got home, I went to my office, sat at my desk. The 1924 pocket watch was finally finished. I'd completed it the night before. It sat on a velvet cloth, ticking softly, keeping perfect time. Fixed, functional, doing what it was meant to do. I picked it up, felt its weight, listened to the steady rhythm of the gears. Some things could be repaired, some couldn't. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Dad, please, one more chance. I'm begging you. Derek. I deleted it without responding. There were no more chances, no more discussions, no more pleas. The final sentencing was in a week, and then Derek would have to live with what he'd chosen. The final hearing took place on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Derek's initial phone call that had started everything. The courtroom was nearly empty this time. Just us, Derek and Kristen, their attorneys, the prosecutor, and Judge Martinez. No audience for the end of their scheme. Derek looked worse than I'd ever seen him. He'd lost weight, his suit hanging loose on his frame, dark circles under his eyes. When he glanced at me, there was nothing left in his expression but exhaustion and defeat. Kristen had taken the plea after the preliminary hearing, as Patricia predicted. She sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead. Her father, Harold Walsh, sat behind her. He wouldn't look at me. Judge Martinez reviewed the plea agreements. Derek Gardner and Kristen Gardner, you've both pleaded guilty to third-degree felony forgery of government documents. In exchange for your plea, the attempted theft charges have been reduced to misdemeanors. Do you both understand the terms? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Kristen's voice cracked. The terms are as follows. 3 years supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, joint restitution of $12,300 to be paid to Ollie and Barbara Gardner. No contact with the Gardners under any circumstances. Permanent disinheritance from the Gardner estate, filed and sealed by the court. Loss of professional licenses. Mr. Gardner, you're barred from working in insurance or any position of financial trust. Ms. Gardner, your banking license is revoked. Kristen made a small, wounded sound. That was her career. Gone. Additionally, the judge continued, both of you will have felony convictions on your records. This will follow you for the rest of your lives. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Derek's voice was barely audible. The judge signed the papers. This case is closed. You're both free to go, subject to the terms of your probation. That was it. No dramatic moment. No grand speeches. Just signatures on paper and 2 people walking out of a courtroom with their lives in ruins. We stood to leave. Derek and Kristen were ahead of us, moving slowly toward the exit, As we passed them in the hallway, Derek stopped. "Dad?" he said. I paused. Looked at him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but—" "You're right," I said quietly. "It doesn't matter." His face crumpled. Kristen pulled him away toward the parking lot. Harold Walsh followed them without a word. Barbara and I walked to our car in silence. The Austin sun was bright, almost painfully so. A beautiful day for the end of something. "Do you feel better?" Barbara asked as I drove us home. "Now that it's done?" I thought about that. I don't feel better. I feel resolved. They faced consequences, real ones. That's all I wanted. No regrets? About pursuing this? No. About Derek becoming someone who could do this? I sighed. That I'll probably always regret. We got home around noon. Patricia had sent over the final paperwork. The disinheritance was now official, filed with the court, sealed and recorded. Our will had been updated. The house, the savings, everything we'd built would go to charity and distant relatives. Derek's name appeared nowhere. I sat in my office that evening, the completed pocket watch on my desk. Through the window I could see Barbara in her garden, tending to her roses, life continuing, as it does. My phone buzzed one last time, another unknown number. But this time, it was a news alert. Local couple sentenced in fake funeral fraud case. Both receive probation, lose professional licenses. The story would fade soon. Another scandal for people to discuss over coffee and forget by next week. But Derek and Kristen would carry it forever. Every job application asking about criminal convictions. Every background check revealing felonies. Every person who Googled their names finding the story. They'd wanted our money, our estate, everything we'd built. Instead, they got criminal records, destroyed careers, and a permanent ban from our lives. The punishment fit the crime. Barbara came in from the garden, bringing that fresh earth smell with her. "What are you thinking about?" "Justice," I said, "and how strange it feels when you get it." She sat beside me. "Do you think he understands now, what he did?" "Maybe. Or maybe he just understands that he got caught." I picked up the pocket watch, showed it to her. "This is from 1890. It survived for over a century because someone maintained it, fixed it when it broke, treated it with care. And Derek? Derek took something valuable and tried to break it for quick cash. Now he has to live with that choice." I set the watch down. "We tried to teach him right from wrong. We gave him every opportunity. But in the end, he chose this. Not us." Barbara nodded slowly. "I keep thinking I should feel sadder, but mostly I just feel tired." "Me too." Over the next few weeks, life began to return to something like normal. The calls from reporters stopped. Our friends and neighbors stopped asking uncomfortable questions. The scandal faded into Austin's background noise. Derek and Kristen moved away. Someone told us they'd left Texas entirely, trying to start over somewhere their names weren't known. I didn't ask for details. Didn't want them. The $12,300 arrived in installments, deducted from their wages by court order. Every payment felt like validation, like the system actually working for once. One evening in late summer, I was in my workshop, restoring a new piece. A clock from 1895, more complex than the pocket watch. Barbara brought me coffee, watched me work for a moment. "You seem peaceful," she observed. "I am." I adjusted a tiny spring with tweezers. "Everything's in order. The right people faced consequences. We can move forward. Without Derek." "Without Derek," I confirmed. "But with each other. With our friends. With a clear conscience." She kissed the top of my head. "I'm proud of you. For standing firm. I'm proud of you, too. For being strong enough to walk into that funeral." She smiled slightly. "That was quite the entrance, wasn't it? Kristen knocked over $3,000 worth of flowers when she saw you." "Good." We both laughed. Real laughter. The first in weeks. And it felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. The clock I was working on chimed suddenly. I'd connected the mechanism correctly. The sound was pure. Clear. Exactly as it should be. "Fixed," I said. Barbara squeezed my shoulder. "Not everything can be fixed, but some things can be set right." "Close enough?" That evening we sat on our back porch, watching the Austin sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The house was quiet, peaceful. Ours. Derek had tried to steal our future. Instead, he'd lost his own. Some people might call that revenge. I called it justice. And in the end, that was all I'd wanted. For the scales to balance, for actions to have consequences, for the truth to matter more than clever schemes. I reached for Barbara's hand. She took it without looking, her fingers warm in mine. Tomorrow, I'd start on another clock. Next week, we'd have dinner with friends who no longer looked at us with pity. Next month, we'd update our will one final time, making sure every dollar went somewhere meaningful. Life would continue. Richer for having removed the rot, stronger for having faced the worst and survived it. Derek had bet everything on our love making us weak. He'd lost. And we'd won something more valuable than any inheritance, the certainty that we'd done the right thing, even when it hurt. That was worth more than all the money in the world. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.